If you've hiked for hours just to see what was over the next ridge, with no real reason to need to know, just the not knowing itself pulling you forward. If standing somewhere high up made your problems feel smaller without actually making them go away. If you've come back from a trail more exhausted than you've been in months and started looking up the next one before you'd even showered. Welcome. There's a real psychological pull behind this, and it isn't really about scenery. Or maybe you know someone like this. The friend who plans an entire vacation around a trailhead instead of a hotel. The person who forgets how brutal the climb was within about 10 minutes of reaching the top. Someone who would genuinely rather sit alone on a ridge in silence than stretch out on a beach chair with a drink. Here's the thing worth understanding first, and it isn't really about mountains being better than beaches. It's that they seem to satisfy different psychological needs almost entirely, and mountains happen to reliably trigger one emotion researchers have gotten very interested in lately: awe. Psychologists define it as the feeling of encountering something so vast it forces your sense of the world to update on the spot. Studies on awe have found it can shrink self-focus, increase generosity, and make time feel less scarce than it did a few minutes earlier. A lot of mountain lovers probably aren't chasing a good view so much as they're chasing that exact feeling, and a mountain happens to be one of the most dependable ways to find it. Part of that feeling comes from something researchers call the small self-experience. Standing in front of something genuinely vast tends to make people feel like a smaller piece of something much larger, and the strange part is how comforting that usually feels instead of how threatening it sounds on paper. The problem waiting back at home doesn't disappear up there. It just gets weighed against something so much bigger that its size in your head quietly recalibrates. There might be a reason this feeling has a physical direction built into the language around it too. Plenty of languages describe success and inspiration in upward terms, rising to the occasion, reaching new heights, looking up to someone, as if elevation and achievement got wired together in human thinking long before anyone built a trail up a mountain on purpose. Part of what keeps that pull going is how much a mountain hides. A beach shows you almost everything the moment you arrive, the whole horizon laid out flat. A mountain conceals information on purpose. Another valley behind that ridge, a hidden lake, a sound you can't place yet, a trail bending somewhere you can't see. Researchers who study environmental preference have long pointed to something called prospect refuge theory. The idea that humans are drawn to landscapes offering both a wide view and a sense of shelter at the same time. A mountain trail winding through trees toward an open ridge does both simultaneously, exposed enough to see far, sheltered enough to feel safe doing it. None of that view comes free, and that turns out to matter more than it seems. Behavioral economists describe something called the IKEA effect, where people value an outcome more specifically because they had to work for it. A summit reached after hours of climbing doesn't just look good. It feels earned in a way a view from a parking lot never quite manages. And that feeling is doing real psychological work, not just decorating the memory afterward. That sense of earning something builds gradually rather than arriving all at once. 2. Every step on a trail changes the view slightly, which means progress stays visible the entire time instead of showing up only at the very end. Researchers studying outdoor recreation also draw a useful line between danger and challenge, and most mountain activities are built around the second one. Real difficulty, with the sharpest risks managed through preparation, gear, and route choice. The reward comes specifically from mastering something hard, not from surviving something reckless, which is a very different feeling, even though both can look similar from a distance. There's also something quieter happening to attention itself out there. Researchers behind attention restoration theory found that certain kinds of stimulation, moving clouds, rustling leaves, a distant stream, hold focus effortlessly instead of draining it the way screens and traffic do. Mountains tend to be full of exactly this kind of stimulation, which is probably why so many people describe coming back from a hike feeling mentally clearer, not just physically tired. The mind wasn't switched off up there. It was resting, while still being gently used. Part of that ease may come from the shapes themselves. Branching rivers, tree limbs, and folded rock layers all repeat similar patterns at different scales, something researchers call fractal geometry. And moderate complexity of that kind has been linked to lower stress and a visual sense of order that's oddly easy to look at for a long time without getting tired of it. Now here's the part almost nobody expects, and it explains something that looks completely irrational from the outside. People who've just finished a genuinely miserable climb, blistered feet, aching legs, hours of effort, will often describe it within days as one of the best things they've done all year. Psychologists call this pattern the peak-end rule, the tendency to judge an entire experience mainly by its most intense moment and how it wrapped up, rather than by an honest average of every difficult minute in between. Climbers even have an informal name for the specific version of this: summit amnesia. The strange and fairly fast fading of how bad the climb actually felt once the view opens up at the top. It's not that the suffering wasn't real. It's that memory quietly rewrites the story once a strong enough ending gets added to it, which is a big part of why people go back and do it again. That return trip rarely means seeing the same place twice. Either a mountain in different weather, different light, or a different season can look and feel almost unrecognizable, which keeps the exploration instinct fed visit after visit. And the solitude up there tends to feel inhabited rather than empty, alone but surrounded by birds, wind, running water, which seems to land very differently than silence with nothing in it at all. Something about walking side by side instead of sitting face to face seems to loosen conversation too, which is part of why a lot of hard conversations happen more easily on a trail than anywhere else people usually have them. None of this means beaches fail at what they do. They're built for a completely different kind of psychological need: openness instead of concealment, immediate ease instead of earned effort, rest instead of exploration, and plenty of people need exactly that on a given week. Mountains just happen to be unusually good at satisfying several older needs at once: shelter, visibility, challenge, discovery, all stacked into a single walk. That combination isn't new either. For most of history, mountains were considered dangerous places to avoid entirely until a cultural shift a couple of centuries ago slowly turned them into destinations people traveled toward on purpose. Across wildly different cultures, the tallest peaks around still tend to be the ones treated as sacred, worth the climb, long before anyone had a word for awe to explain why. Subscribe and watch this video next.